Hello Year 4, it's Miss Bellis here and I'm back today for our math session where we are going to continue to look at graphs. Okay, so here is today's in focus and there's quite a lot of detail to take in on this one. So we've got two line graphs here. Our first one shows the amount of rainfall from July to December in one particular year in Singapore, which is over in Asia. And then we have another line graph here that shows the amount of rainfall for the same period, the same time, in London. So we can see that on both of the graphs, we have the months set out at the bottom, and we have the amount of rainfall is recorded on our y-axis. So have a careful look at both of the graphs and see if you can answer these questions. What patterns can you see? What predictions can you make? What do you notice about the scales? And can you describe the rainfall in the two places? Okay, so let's have a look at these graphs together. So if we look at the line graph for Singapore, we can see that we have our months along here from July to December, and we have our rainfall here. Now, did you notice underneath the rainfall on the Singapore graph, it said cm for centimetres? If we look at the line graph for London, we can see we have the months from July to December here, and we have the rainfall here. But did you notice that here it says millimetres? So we might need to be quite careful when we compare the information. So let's see what information we can find. We've got a table here to help us, and the first thing we could look for is the greatest amount of rainfall in both of the cities. So let's have a look at Singapore first. So if I wanted to find the greatest amount of rainfall in Singapore in the period, then if I look at the graph, I can straight away see that the greatest amount is going to be the highest point of my line on the line graph, and that's in December. If I look across to my y-axis, it will tell me how much rain there was in December. And we can see that would be halfway between 30 centimetres and 40 centimetres. So that would be 35 centimetres. So let's have a look at London. So where do you think is which do you think is the greatest amount of rainfall in London? Again, if we look at the line graph, we can see the highest point is here in October, so that's our greatest amount. And if I look across to my scale here, I think that takes us to about 92. Now, don't forget, the London graph is in millimetres. That's 92 millimetres. Now, which is bigger, a centimetre or a millimetre? You're absolutely right. A centimetre is 10 times the size of a millimetre. So if we were comparing Singapore and London's greatest amount of rainfall, then we will need to think about that. So London had 92 millimetres, Singapore had 35 centimetres. Now I know that 35 centimetres is the same as 350 millimetres. So they had more rainfall. Now let's have a look at the least amount of rainfall. So for Singapore, if I'm looking for the least amount, I'm going to look for the lowest point on my line. And I can see that's in August. And if I look across to my y-axis, it will tell me that that's 12 centimetres. And if I look at the same for London, again, I'm looking for my least amount. Do you think that's this one? No, you're right. It's over here in July. And if I look across to my y-axis to see the amount of rainfall, I can see that that's 62 millimetres. And then it asks us to find out the difference between the greatest and least amount of rainfall. Well, in Singapore, the greatest amount of rainfall was 35 centimetres and the least amount was 12 centimetres. So we need to find the difference between 35 and 12. So we could make the calculation 35 take away 12, which would give us 23 centimetres. And if we do the same for London, we need to find the difference between the greatest amount, which is 92 millimetres, and the least amount, which is 62 millimetres. And we can do the calculation 92 take away 62, which will give us 30 millimetres. So you can see we can get quite a lot of information from the line graphs. And in fact, we have a question down here of what can you say about rainfall in the two places? There's quite a few things that we could say. We could say that in Singapore from August to December, the amount of rainfall increased, that is, it got bigger. And for London, we could say that between July and October, the amount of rainfall increased, but then it decreased slightly going towards December. So here is today's guided practice. And what we need to do is draw two line graphs on the same grid to show the rainfall in Singapore and London from July to December that year. So we're going to put both of the graphs onto this one grid, and that can be really useful for when you want to compare data. Now, if we look carefully at the line graph, we can see that we have on the x-axis, we have our months from July to December, and then we have on our y-axis the rainfall in millimetres. And that's going to be important when we start plotting the information onto our graph. Now, I've included a table that shows you the amount of rainfall in both cities, and I've put this on the worksheet as well. But let's have a go at plotting some of this information together before you have a go on your own. So let's have a look at London first. Now, London is in millimetres, their measurement, and the graph is also in millimetres, so that should be quite simple. So in July, they had 62 millimetres of rainfall. So if I get my pen and I go to July, I go up to 60 and maybe just slightly above it, I can put my little cross there. You'll be able to do it better than me. Okay, and if I looked for August, that would be 68 millimetres. So again, I can go to August, I can go up to 60 and sort of just above it if I can. There we are, and put it in there. And if I looked at September, they had 70 millimetres of rain. So I go to September, go to the point where it intersects with 70 on the y-axis, and I can put that cross in there. Now I want you to put the rest of the information for London on yourself, but before you do that, let's have a look at Singapore together. So with Singapore, what we need to remember is that their measurements were in centimetres. Now, Ravi reminds us up here that 10 millimetres is 1 centimetre. So I'm going to need to convert these measurements to be able to put them onto the graph. So in July, Singapore had 16 centimetres. So 16 times 10 is 160. So that tells me that in millimetres, Singapore had 160 millimetres. So I'm going to change colour to put that on the graph. I'm going to come up to July and go up to 160 on here and put my mark there. And then for August, it's 12 centimetres. That's 120 millimetres. So for August, I will come up to the 120 line and put it here. Now, when I've put all of my data on, I will then join my lines up. Okay, so have a go at that, and then you have a couple of questions to answer here. So here are the answers to the guided practice. I hope that your line graph looks something like this. And we had a couple of questions to answer as well. It asked what the difference in rainfall between Singapore and London was during August. So if we look at August, we know that Singapore had 120 millimetres and London had 68 millimetres. So we can take one from the other, and that will give us 52 millimetres. And in question 2, it says, in which month was the difference the greatest? Well, we can see that that's where we've got the biggest gap between our lines, and that is in December. Okay, so here is today's worksheet. Now on the first page of the worksheet, you don't need to write anything. It shows you 2 line graphs. One is for the number of cars sold by company A from May to October, and the other one shows you a line graph showing the amount of cars sold by company B from May to October in the same year. So you need to look at these really carefully to be able to answer the rest of the questions. So for question 1, you need to complete this table by taking the information from the graph and writing it in these boxes. And once you have that information, you can circle the correct answers in question 2. For question 3, it's quite like the guided practice because you have to draw 2 line graphs on the same grid to show the number of cars sold by company A and company B. Now you will get this information from the table that you filled out for question 1. And then you have these questions to answer here. So here are the answers for questions 1 and 2. And here are the answers for question 3. Okay, I hope you got on okay with that. Next week, we'll be moving on to a new topic, and that's the end of maths for today. I hope you have a fantastic day. Goodbye.